What's up everyone and welcome back to another video. This video is all about Lee Sin and our 5 quick tips to climb ranks with him. So Lee Sin is an incredibly advanced champion in League of Legends and there are an infinite amount of tips and tricks that you can learn as you play him. So we've compiled what we think are the most useful tips to help you climb ranks with him. The first combo we're going to talk about today is Lee Sin's Insect combo. So this signature combo was first done by a player called Insect all the way back in 2013. This is Lee Sin's most popular combo and has become his main identity in most games. If you are going to call yourself a Lee Sin main, you're going to need to perfect this, and there are several ways you can do it once you get the hang of it. The first combo here is probably the most straightforward and classic Insect combo. You're going to jump to your target with your Q, ward hop behind them with your safeguard, and then simply kick them back into your team. The second combo is using your kick flash instead of your ward hop, and this is just a different version that's usually a little bit harder for your enemy to react to. This third variation is a way to perform the Insect, but also get yourself back to your team alongside your opponent. This is a fantastic way to make sure that you aren't just sacrificing yourself to get that target killed. This final one is a variation that is a lot harder for the enemy to expect. Usually, if you Q to your target, they'll all stack up and be ready for you to jump in. However, if you Q to a target near them, say a minion, they'll likely treat this as a missed Q and forget about you altogether. You can then catch them off guard by using that minion to gain extra distance and then combo that with your W and kick flash. Now there are more variations of this combo as you'd expect, as Lee Sin has been around for donkey's years. However, in our opinion, these are the most common and the most effective when it comes to being ahead of your opponents. Although we will be covering more combos later on in this guide, we do have a full list on our website, so make sure you check them out if you want to fully master his kit. So moving on to tip number 2, stealing and securing barons and dragons and map mobility. Lee Sin has always notoriously been known for being excellent at stealing all objectives. His slippery kit allows him to do it with ease, and we're going to show you a few ways you can do this effectively. Using Lee Sin's mobility is key to stealing these objectives, especially without getting punished. During Lee's Q and W window, even though you're moving, you can still spite an objective. You can jump in with your resonating strike and dash out with your safeguard, and during both of these windows you can smite at any point. It is very hard for your opponents to react to this, and as long as you're not too far behind in levels, this should be a simple task for any advanced Lee Sin player. So Lee Sin's Q is also an execute, as we mentioned earlier, and this is insanely useful when it comes to securing objectives. If you time your smite in between your Q1 and your Q2 will deal a significant amount of burst, and this allows you to secure most dragons and barons without much risk of an opponent stealing it. Aside from stealing major objectives, you can also use Lee Sin's kit to get around the map very efficiently, in and out of combat. As Lee Sin, you can Q to any camp if you know that it's up, and then further extend that distance afterwards with your W. You can additionally wait for an opponent to follow you after your Q, and then W or flash back over the wall to safety. You can also use your W to cancel your Q's dash to bait out your opponent's flashes without committing. This fake can be done frequently and can easily confuse your opponents. So as well as that, you can also add jungle plants to create even more distance covered. For example, Q over the wall to wolves, then ward hop over to the seed, and then auto the seed for a ridiculous amount of distance covered. Don't forget there are some allied abilities that you can W to, such as Thresh Lantern or Heimerdinger turrets, so even more options for extending your ridiculous mobility. The final point of this tip is that once the dragon has spawned, you can use that to gain extra distance. Q over to it, then position yourself so the dragon knocks you even further, and then combine that with a flash or a W, and you can get straight to the opposition blue buff in a matter of seconds, or just simply arrive a bit quicker for a fight in the river. Moving on to tip number 3, team fighting on Lee Sin. Everybody will tell you that Lee Sin is a bad late game champion, and to a certain extent they're correct. His scaling isn't incredible and he does fall off compared to many other champions, but Lee Sin's utility is often underappreciated and can genuinely make way more difference than you'd expect. In this tip, we're going to cover how you can be effective on Lee Sin in late game teamfights. The first way to teamfight as Lee Sin would be to look for an engage. Earlier on we spoke about the Insect combos that you can perform, and this is a huge part of playing Lee Sin in teamfights. Kicking your opponent into your own team can genuinely win any game. So just make sure you're always looking out for an enemy who has stepped out of position and be ready to act on it. The next way to teamfight on Lee Sin would be assassinating. If you're super far ahead on Lee Sin, you can easily dive into the enemy backline and delete their high value targets. You will need to be pretty far ahead to achieve this, and remember that it's likely that you may lose your life in return, especially if you've built like a glass cannon. If you do land your combos correctly though, it's really hard for the enemy carries to stay alive. Now we're going to talk about Lee Sin's peel. Lee Sin's peel is super underrated and can often make the difference in teamfights. His kit is just as good at sticking to his opponents as it is his allies, so keep your high priority targets alive by shielding them, slowing the enemies around them, and kicking any major threats away. You may think this is obvious, but often this is far more useful than focusing on the enemy backline, as your AD carry may have way more to deal with than theirs. For example, if your AD carry is 10 and 0 and the opposing AD carry is 0 and 10, it's going to be way more beneficial to keep yours alive rather than assassinating theirs. And lastly, the other way to play Lee Sin in teamfights is to look for multi-target CC. This is probably the hardest one to pull off as it's incredibly difficult to line up, but this is what really separates the good Lee Sins from the rest. Your ultimate can be used exactly like a Malphite ultimate if you perform it correctly. Practicing your kick flash or ward hop kick are crucial to lining up this AoE CC ability. Additionally, you can combine this effort with your peeling, so stick on your backline and then look for a multi-target kick when they attempt to dive on them. It's also worth noting that when choosing your target to kick, the higher health they have deals way more damage to their teammates, so always look to kick a tanky frontliner into their entire team for maximum damage alongside its CC. All of the methods we have talked about here are all super viable strategies for Lee Sin's teamfighting. However, what makes you good at this champion is knowing when to perform each option and making those big decisions in the heat of the moment. Tip number 4, ganking as Lee Sin. Lee Sin has quite a few creative gank paths and he can be used in a way that you may not have thought about before. Due to the fact that Lee Sin can ward hop over walls, he can take many of the unconventional paths that, let's say for example, Rek'Sai could take. The difference is, Lee Sin's ward hop is super fast and harder to react to. So combining this with your flash, you can get instantly behind a lane and kick them back into your teammates. You can also do this with your Q in a similar manner, so Q over the wall onto a lane minion and then jump through to be behind your enemy. This is quite a unique way to gank, but it does require a good bit of timing, so make sure you don't miss that minion and waste your opportunity. After you land from your Q2, you'll be in prime position to kick your opponent into your allies. Due to the fact you still have your W up, you can then use this and your flash to cover more distance, making it nearly impossible to play against. Another way to use your Q effectively in a gank is when an enemy is hiding behind a wave, smite the minion as you fire your Q so it's impossible for them to react to and dodge as they won't expect it to hit them. You can then follow this up into a kick combo to secure an easy kill for any lane. One last thing to mention about ganking is typically as Lee Sin you won't want to always lead with your Q. It's usually better to lead with your W or E and then follow this up with your Q. The reason being that when your opponent is slowed by your E, they're going to be a lot easier to hit with your Q, and as they'll be lower health, your Q is going to deal more damage. This brings us to the last tip of the day and the one you've all been waiting for. Number 5, combos. As you can imagine, and as we have discussed already throughout this advanced tips video, there are a ridiculous amount of combos and creative ways that you can outplay your opponents with Lee Sin. Aside from the combos we've already spoke about earlier in the video, we're going to talk about a few of the most useful and most frequently advised combos to help you perform optimally when playing this champion. The first one is the most common way to deal a huge amount of burst damage on Lee Sin, benefiting from the execute on your Q. This one is probably the most common way to engage your opponent and burst them down, especially in a ganking scenario. Be careful not to use your Q2 too quickly when doing these combos, especially when fighting over walls, as this can prevent you from following your target. This one is a slightly different way of performing a burst combo on Lee Sin, utilising the CC part of your ultimate to guarantee landing your Q. This one is somewhat known as the quick sec. It's basically a way to make the insec almost impossible to react to. You'd land your Q on your target, then W to a ward, then use your Q2 to cancel that W, and then now you have access to your E and R whilst flying. Then as you land on your opponent, you're going to follow that up with an instant kick flash. This is possibly one of the rarer combos for Lee Sin, as most of the time it may not be essential, but when it does get performed well, it's so hard for the opponent to react to. This one is just a great way to reposition yourself and get close to your target so you can maximize burst and also have the potential to hit multiple targets. When you get comfortable with this combo, you may find yourself using it often, as it works well in almost all scenarios. You can even add in a flash after that ward hop to go even further for this combo. This one is a classic Lee Sin combo, and it's a personal favourite of mine to use. I will typically use this in most of my games. It's very hard to react to, but deals a crazy amount of damage when performed correctly. This is a very high risk, high reward combo, as if you do miss your Q before flashing, you'll look like a bit of a plonker. Lastly on our list of combos, we have the most flashy of the Lee Sin plays, but possibly the hardest to pull off. It's reliant on input buffering your ward hop when combined with your flash to cover insane distance in a very short space of time. You do this by inputting your W placement into your ward hop and then proccing it by flashing into range instantly. You can combine this with the rest of your kit to make some pretty nasty plays. This is a great way to get behind your opponent in the blink of an eye and then burst them down with your teammate. This is similar to the way we just mentioned, but using it in a scenario similar to an insect combination. That wraps up our 5 quick tips to climb ranked video all about Lee Sin. We hope you enjoyed it and feel free to let us know who you'd like to see next in the comments.